Well, I have a change.
Oh, okay.
There's no, it's not a change, but right after public comments, I'm going to turn the meeting over to Beth Moore, who is the chair of our Personnel Board Subcommittee. And she's going to actually run the interviews, and I'll take over again after our closed session today. Okay?
Excellent.
All right?
Okay.
So if there's no other changes, I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
The motion second, that we accept the agenda as is with the changes. Are there any questions? All in favor, vote yes.
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 Opposed have the same rights. Approval of our minutes. Thank you, Robin, for making those changes. Does anyone have any changes to our minutes? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
I move their approval.
Second?
It's been motion and second that the minutes be approved. Are there any questions? All in favor would vote yes.
Yes.
Opposed have the same rights. Thank you. Do we have anyone for public comment? Mr. Wegman. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. President, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Tonight, we will make what may be the most important decision that you will make for a while. We will send up to the council what candidates for executive director. I would like to say that the Police Oversight Board is going to be working with the city with regard to police oversight. Unfortunately, history shows you're going to be working against the city. And you're going to need an executive director who will stand for and with you and under you, and not against you, and not for the city. The history of this administration has shown attempts to undermine police oversight, to the point that in the settlement agreement with the DOJ, there's a provision that prohibits the city attorney's office from issuing legal opinions that undermine oversight. The police chief, who was appointed 15 months ago or so, came into office saying that the shooting of James Boyd was justified. Less than 2 months ago, when a police officer shot on Memorial Day, when a police officer shot at an SUV with a 5-year-old child in the cab and in an apartment parking lot. After DOJ over a year ago had said it's absolutely not good to shoot at moving vehicles, Chief Eden justified the officer doing that shooting and hadn't even changed the policy at that point. DOJ criticized the chain of command of the police department for failing to exercise discipline, for failing to implement reforms. Yet Chief Eden has done nothing but promote from inside the chain of command. He even promoted to a position just below himself, commander who was in fact the commanding officer of the people who shot James Boyd. This is not a police department that is looking to reform itself. There is a history of perceived and actual dishonesty coming from the administration and from people in charge of police oversight. And it's very important that you pick somebody who will be absolutely honest and who will follow your agenda, not their own. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, is there any other comments? What I want to do is turn it over to Ms. Moore, Beth Moore, who is the co-chair, or my co-chair, and chairman of the personnel board to actually run the interviews. So if you want to start now.
Okay.
Are you gonna keep everyone here, or?
Yeah, so we have a few issues of housekeeping to take care of, Police Oversight Board. There were a few things that the Personnel Committee wanted you to decide before we start. One of them is whether or not we're going to ask the candidates to wait outside during the other candidates' interviews. I would suggest that that's probably the most fair thing to do, otherwise the last person gets to hear all the answers of the first person and potentially help them. Of course, maybe it potentially hurts them too, but I think that that would be the thing that we could do. And Mr. Baker, is there any problem? I know it's a public meeting, but is there any problem with asking the people that are about to be interviewed to just sit outside?
If there's no objection to that from the applicants, then we could establish as a fair procedure.
Okay, applicants, are you all okay with that? We want to try and be fair to everybody.
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Staff of the CPOA, if you can make sure that there's chairs out there so that we're not asking people to stand around for a long time. Thank you very
Are there
much.
speakers out in the hallway as well?
Well, I mean, we can't control the whole building.
No, I'm just saying, it's the same as the meeting inside.
And for folks sort of running things up there, we know you're there, and we can see you. Could you all turn off the speakers in the foyer area, please? Otherwise, there's not much point in having you leave. Okay. POB members, what you have in front of you are some different pieces of paper. One of them has the questions on them, plus all the applicant names. If you would take a moment to write your name on each of those pieces of paper. All of these pieces of paper become public record, and we need to hang on to them. We want to make sure that everyone has their name on their answer and score sheet. What you have in front of you is the scoring system that was proposed by the Personnel Committee. And if you want to do something else as a group, you can absolutely decide this. We did this just because it's simple. It uses nice odd numbers for the questions and a nice even number for the total. For those who are statistics geeks, that makes things easier to do. I guess there's a lot of statistics geeks. Does anyone have any interest in changing the score sheet as written?
I think it's fine.
Okay.
I like it.
We will keep moving. The other thing that we need to decide is how everybody wants to read the questions. Coincidentally, there are the same number of questions as there are POB members, so you have the choice of reading the same question 5 times or going down the road and switching. You want to just take the first question and go around? Everybody okay with that? I don't think we need to vote on it. It's fairly common sense. For any of you who have not done government interviews, it's not it really is freewheeling as it would be in a regular personnel interview. We're asking everybody the same questions. It's fine to follow up with a question on the same topic by anyone. You can also ask a follow-up question on the writing assignment if you wish. If we could just kind of talk about that for a second before you actually pose one of those, if there's some burning thing that you want to ask them. Make sure that we're asking questions that are sort of okay to ask.
I just wanted to do a point of clarification.
Yes.
We were told from the personnel lawyer for the city, the HR lawyer, that we could ask clarifying questions of the materials we receive from the applicants.
Correct.
So if something's not clear to you, you can ask just that person to clarify that without asking everybody to clarify something that may not exist.
Precisely. As long as it's a follow-up question to the original questionnaire that they were asked.
I have a question.
Yes.
Is it just to clarify, or if something's brought up and you'd like it more expanded,
Expound on
information.
that, yes.
I think that's fine to
Tell us
ask
more
people
about
to,
that.
you know, if there's something from their written questionnaire that you'd like to know more about, I think that's fine too. Ms. Holt?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Member Brown, yes, you can go ahead and ask them to explain anything within the content of their written answers for more clarification or to expand upon that. That would be perfectly appropriate.
But we're going to have an executive session for personnel matters and also, I think, anticipated litigation discussion. Is that correct, Mr. Baker? Or did you have anything to discuss? Just personnel matter?
It'll just be personnel
Okay.
matters.
And I think we can score our sheets while we're back there also, so people aren't sitting around watching us try to do math. Each candidate has already turned in the forms that we needed them to turn in, and just for those who are not familiar with the procedure as outlined in the ordinance, what we will be deciding today is our top 3 candidates. Our top 3 candidates in ranked order will be sent to City Council, and we will ask City Council to appoint one of those 3 people. The city HR department will be doing background checks and employment verifications, and the members of the POB, potentially the personnel subcommittee or anybody else on the POB who would wish to, will be doing reference checks. And at the very end of the meeting, we'll be asking for volunteers regarding that. Are there any questions of the POB before we begin?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. With the fact that we have 5 to interview, should we set some kind of a time limit on each interview so that those who are farther down the line are not squeezed out by those who are at the front?
We talked about this a little bit in the personnel subcommittee, and I think we felt like we wanted to let people say whatever they wanted to say. We're hopeful that people will speak for a reasonable amount of time.
Okay.
Does the POB wish to set a time limit?
I think with only 5, we'll move along pretty fast,
All right.
hopefully. But we're dealing with lawyers,
Very nice.
We have to stop denigrating lawyers.
Okay, anything else before we call in our first applicant? Okay, can we ask Mr. Harness to come in, please?
Diana?
You want to let him there? Or you can have him. Is he gonna be
Do I stand for the inquisition, or do I?
Speak
Get a
into that
seat.
microphone.
Oh, okay.
It's entirely.
Yes, I
up to you.
stand.
Mr. Harness, you can stand there, or you can sit down at the microphone desk right up here, whatever you are more comfortable
Oh,
with.
this is good.
And we're gonna go around and ask you questions.
Good evening.
Good evening.
And my name is Sue Brown, and I'm a member of the board, as you guessed. And, the question I wanted to ask you was, what experience as an employee most has impacted the way you manage others?
What experience as an employee helped form my management style?
That's right.
Well, let's see. I had an experience when I was in college that stuck with me. I was working at a small convenience store that was family run, and near the end of the shift, one of the family members came in and cashed a check right before the end of my shift. So I did my drawer, and then the next morning I was called and told that there were missing funds. Well, the funds missing were the check from that family member. And I quickly realized that I wasn't going to win that argument and that battle. So what it taught me as a manager was that you must listen to what your employees have to say, and you must be able to investigate and ferret out the facts when you're dealing with your employees. They need to be treated fairly and they need to be heard. And I carry that forward today.
Thank you.
Hi, Mr. Harms. I'm Morning Mala McCoy. How are you tonight?
Good morning. Oh, excuse me. Good evening.
Thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
So a two-part question. Can you describe your experience, working under the direction of a board or other analogous body? And what are some of the strategies? So your experience, and then some of the strategies you would use to ensure a constructive and collaborative working relationship between yourself and this board.
Okay. When I was at the Better Business Bureau of Wisconsin as the director of the Dispute Resolution Center, we had a board that directed the operations of the Better Business Bureau of Wisconsin. And as a part of my responsibilities, I had to report to the board the activities of the Dispute Resolution Center. We did consumer complaints, we did arbitration, we did mediation. So I certainly learned the value of making sure that my analysis was correct and timely, but I also learned that their guidance and input was helpful, especially when it came to some of the bigger goals of the organization. It helped guide us through a transition from a cadre of arbitrators that were lay persons, non-attorneys, to attorneys, and their guidance was very helpful. And I had a very good working relationship with the board as we worked through that.
Specific strategies?
Specific strategies?
Yeah.
Well, communicating, speaking, and listening. Being accessible to the board members, besides times of board meetings, being responsive to their requests. Specific strategies, I wouldn't say that I would name a specific strategy as opposed to ensuring that I'm carrying out my duties as they put them forward, and that I could rely on them to carry out the duties and their responsibilities as well.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. The Civilian Police Oversight Agency, oops. Yes. The Civilian Police Oversight Agency, which we abbreviate CPOA, is the office side of the Police Oversight Board. That is the agency of which the candidacy that you're seeking, you'd be the head of. How would you measure success for that agency?
How would I measure success? Well, being that I answer to this body, I believe that the body would have certain standards and matrix, timelines, and tasks that I must accomplish. I would believe that within the agency itself, of which I was the director, I would be measured by my success as having a relationship with the department, so that The free access as described in the settlement agreement is there, that there isn't any interference in that area, that I am a trusted asset for the community and the department and this board as well, that our investigations are done in a timely and thorough manner, and that our recommendations are carried through and followed through all the way to whatever, if there's discipline, carrying that all the way through and holding the department responsible if in fact there is a disagreement as it relates to the discipline and the recommendation thereof. I understand that the settlement outlines a certain criteria for how each complaint is supposed to be categorized. We will meet that criteria. But we should also be examined on how well we're connecting with the community and how we're gaining trust for not only the general community, but the stakeholders with which we would have contact and with which we would be getting buy-in from those stakeholders. There will be numbers that have to be evaluated. Those are cases, those are timelines. Those are very concrete, and the analysts, I'm sure Ms. Moore can analyze all the numbers. But it's beyond that. It's beyond, it is establishing trust again in the community and getting a level of communication, free flow of communication, so that not only the board and the agency can be effective, but the department can be effective as well, because the department can't be as effective as it needs to be if the community doesn't trust it.
Thank you, sir.
Certainly.
Mr. Harness, how will you deal with institutional resistance to change?
Well, I would, first off, outline the changes that are already enumerated in the settlement, and those are certainly the starting point. And then I would have conversations with the stakeholders and ask them what is their resistance to change A and change B. Why do they believe that this isn't in the best interest of the city and of the department and of the officers? And then if those reasons are of such consequence that perhaps things need to be thought through more, then bring that to the board for guidance as to perhaps why this change can happen or why that change can happen. But beyond that, at some point, you have to exercise whatever authority you have to make those changes, and you have to monitor those changes, and you have to establish criteria so that those changes, you can monitor as those changes take place. So at some point, you may have to have a tough conversation with a stakeholder about what needs to be done and why it needs to be done. And ultimately, I know I always feel better when I have to do something that I don't quite understand or I may be opposed to, if it's explained to me and the reason behind it. You know, just don't tell me I have to be here at 2 o'clock. Let me know why. Well, there's a deadline because there's this document due. So, you know, just explain the situation, give it some perspective. And I think if you do that, you'll start to erode some of the institutional bias for change. I think that my experience as a police officer might ease some of that bias when approaching the department, because I have the experiences that they have, and that certainly not that I am going to favor the department in one way or the other, but I have empathy for certain things that happen on the street and certain activities that happen. So perhaps that little bit of extra trust might help me build that bridge to overcome the bias to change.
Mr. Harkins, welcome.
Thank you.
How will you create a strategy for public outreach, and what groups will you prioritize for the outreach, and why?
Well, the first thing that I would do to prioritize the outreach is speak with this body, other members of the community, to find out exactly who the stakeholders are and who the spokesperson is for those stakeholders. And then I am the kind of person that I like to have a conversation, a cup of coffee, and reach out to those individually. Beyond that, beyond the initial individual outreach that I would do, I'm a lawyer that has had to market my practice, and I've marketed my practice doing trade shows, being at community events. I would be visible in the community, and that would be one of the priorities as well. And I would put together a platform for outreach through social media, Facebook and Twitter, and be very aggressive with that outreach as well. Not being from the community, I can't tell you specifically which stakeholders are a priority at this point. That would take me a few days to get the lay of the land, so to speak, and then certainly I would reach out to them.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Harris.
Good evening.
Based on your review of the DOJ findings letter, settlement agreement / consent decree, the police oversight ordinance, what do you expect to be some of the primary challenges for the executive director, and how do you plan to address those?
Well, I think that what struck me is obviously the use of force, and the areas, I don't want to say indictment, but the negative reaction from the Department of Justice as it relates to the department in so many phases as it relates to use of force. The first thing that I would do is I would check in with the chief and see how he's doing on his timelines with his required policy changes. After that, with the outreach, I think that we might be gaining some more information about use of force, complaints that perhaps are not coming forward to the police department themselves. Because in the Department of Justice settlement agreement, it specifically states that the board is to take anonymous complaints, which I support, because anonymous complaints are a great management tool for the department to take a look at patterns and practice and behavior and things that are happening. Not necessarily as a tool for punishment, because this board is not a tool for punishment. This board is a tool for creating a better department through management and policy. Beyond making sure that the chief has met his timelines, then we need to examine other policies within that use of force. I believe that I believe strongly that if there's a decision that use of force is justified by internal affairs and even by the district attorney's office, that doesn't necessarily mean that the officer acted correctly. I have faced situations where I could have used deadly force, but did not. And what we need on the street are officers that will take that extra millisecond to evaluate and to think. Not that they have to put themselves in jeopardy, because we're not talking about putting your life in jeopardy to wait an extra second to make a decision. But certainly tactically, through training and hiring, depending on the officers that are being hired, better decisions can be made by officers. I'll cite for you the example in Tennessee, where the child was shot. Those officers gave themselves no chance to make a decision. They rolled up on that 12-year-old from here to there. And when they saw what they thought was a gun, yes, there could be a finding of justification. But was that the right decision? Did they act tactically correct? Why didn't they take a pass? Why didn't they come around? Why didn't they park and approach, give themselves cover, so that they could have time to make decisions? Those are critical points. And right now we're in a time where we have to make big policy changes, but then we also have to start looking at the finer points of being a police officer and being in law enforcement. Do we need to always have two-person patrols? There's an incident in Madison, Wisconsin, a one-person patrol, an out-of-control individual that he pursues into a house, and he ends up shooting the gentleman, and it's found to be justified. He could have waited 10 more seconds for his backup and perhaps prevented that from being a deadly force situation. Those are all things that have to be analyzed, and those are all things that have to be trained, and it will go all the way from the top to officers that get hired.
Thank you.
How do you do? I'm Joanne Fine.
Yes.
Nice to meet you.
Good to meet you.
Please add anything else we should have asked you and didn't think of.
Is that it? This is the round?
This is it.
This is it? I did prepare a bit of a statement. It's uncomfortable sometimes when you have to talk about yourself, but this is what's necessary in order to be a good candidate for the position. First off, thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate that you allowed me to come in and try for the position. I believe that my skills and my experience uniquely qualify me for this position. 13 years as a private practice attorney, 2 years acting as a director of a statewide organization administering dispute resolution, 6 years patrolling Milwaukee as a police officer. This position requires more than legal knowledge. It requires a well-rounded, wide breadth of skills. I have those skills. I am a mediator, and I can put the mediation program in place as required by the ordinance. I'm not going to do that. I can't do the mediations because I can't be neutral, but I'm certain that once my feet are on the ground, I can find plenty of mediators that will come in and serve the organization. I also want to point out the fact that I'm dedicated to my community. I teach financial literacy to at-risk youth in Milwaukee. During the housing crisis of 2008, I went to Washington DC to lobby Congress and Senate for a housing bill that could help distressed homeowners. And I serve on my village's police commission. I have certified 3/4 of the staff that now polices our village. Most of the recent promotions, hired the new chief, drafted new complaint policy, and even created a position, a staffing position so that we could overcome some internal strife when we hired the new chief and did not hire the internal candidate. Because I believe because we hired the best person for the position, for the needs of our community. I think when you throw all that together, I have what it takes to fill the position and to be effective. As I said, I'm calm, I'm pragmatic, but I do make decisions, and I do get things done. Again, I appreciate your time. Thank you very much. Is there anything else?
Thank you, sir.
Members of the POB, do you have any other questions, any follow-up questions?
Follow up?
Great. Thank you very much,
Great.
sir. Sorry, go ahead.
You mentioned previously your experience as an officer on the street.
Yes.
I'm just curious how you moved from that into becoming a lawyer. What were the factors?
I always wanted to be a lawyer. When from taking a business law class when I was a freshman in college. Now, I went to college originally just to play baseball. That's the truth, the reality. And then I broke my wrist and I wasn't able to play baseball any longer. But I took a class from a professor who was in the process of suing Ford Motor Company because his son died as a result of a rear-end collision in a Pinto. And that sparked my interest in the law. So I always had it in the back of my mind that I wanted to go to law school and I wanted to become a lawyer and I wanted to help people. And that's what my practice does. I now represent low-income individuals in many different areas. But that's where it started. So through the arc of my career, and you have my CV in front of you, so you see it took me a long time to finally get to law school. But that was the genesis of it. I served my 6 years at MPD to finish my bachelor's degree. And then as soon as I was able to go to law school, I resigned from the department and went to law school full time.
Thank you.
Certainly.
Any other members of the POB with a question?
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
We know you came a long way. We appreciate it very much. And I know you have a flight to catch.
It's been fun.
Hurry up.
Thank you, sir.
I'm sorry, we can't allow members of the public to ask questions. We appreciate it.
Thank you
Thank you
very
very
much.
much,
Thank
Mr.
you, sir.
Hearns.
Thank you, sir.
Mhm. We're going to take just a few minutes and catch up on our notes here, and then we'll call the next applicant in.
Co-Chair Mark, can I ask a question? I noticed there's no closed captioning during the interview. Is that purposeful?
Ms. Hammer, I saw closed captioning earlier. Are we not trying to close caption the?
They're on, I don't know what issues.
I saw them closed captioning. I guess
Okay.
it was not monitored on them.
Maybe it's just not on our monitors? Because it was earlier.
Yeah. I just happened to notice that we weren't getting it during the questions.
Mhm.
The monitor's off outside.
Okay. I wonder if turning the monitors off outside, which we did ask for, so the other candidates don't get to, see or hear the questions.
Oh, maybe that's why they're off. They're off.
Well, that would make sense.
Maybe they're not doing it because they don't want it.
Right, because maybe the closed captioning would go out there.
If the monitors are on.
Yeah.
I don't know. Ms. Hammer, can you find out on that for us, please? You know, we want to make sure that members of the public have access to the closed caption. No, I'm not talking about the monitors outside. I'm talking about the closed captioning was up here, and then during the interview, it went away, and so we don't know if that means that the.
I saw the closed captioning throughout. I don't know if they just have it off certain monitors and not on
Okay.
others.
Can you just double check and make sure? Thank you.
It's good to know if the one going out on the television has it as well.
Right.
Hearing.
Said closed captioning suspended.
Don't worry about adding stuff up, just put in your numbers and we'll add them. And I also need to caution members of the public audience. Some folks were talking during the applicant's, discussion, and that's not fair to the applicant. So I'm going to ask you one warning, please. No chatting back there that's going to provide an unfair disadvantage to anybody. And again, we had our public comment session, so we cannot take, questions and stuff from the public. I appreciate your being here. We're glad you're here. But we need to try and be fair to all the applicants. Thank you. Let me know when you're ready.
I'd like to hear more to the review. Yes.
Can we bring in Mr. Bradley, please? Welcome, Mr. Bradley. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Ms. Brown, whenever you're ready.
All right. My name is Sue Brown. I'm a member of the board here. I was wondering what, I'm sorry to hit my microphone. I was wondering what experience you've had as an employee that informs the way you manage others in the workplace.
Well, when I was working for the Jefferson County Sheriff's Department in Colorado, I did a lot of administrative management, budget work, and so forth. And because of the way I came into the department, I got an insight into how the department was run and managed before I actually went to the field myself. And that gave me a considerable insight. Then, of course, I went to law school, and I was fortunate. I interned with Justice Pringle and Chief Justice Pringle and Senior Judge Smith in the Colorado Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court, and they both gave me valuable insights. Also, when I graduated from law school, I was fortunate in being adopted, so to speak, by practicing attorneys who gave me considerable guidance on how to conduct myself and how to deal with others and so forth. And of course, in operating my own practice, I was obliged to quite frequently have to make decisions that are administrative. I always, of course, tried to approach the matter in my own practice as if we're all a family and it's a team. But occasionally a situation would arise which would require me to take some sort of definitive action.
Thank you very much.
You're entirely welcome.
Hi, Mr. Bradley, I'm Moira McCoy. So this is a two-part question. We'd like to hear you describe your experience working under the direction of a board of directors or other analogous body. And then if you'd offer some strategies also to use to ensure a constructive and collaborative working relationship between you as executive director and the board.
My primary experience with boards of directors was not being employed by them, but being a member of them and therefore responsible for their operations and representing the board and the public. words, I sat on the board of directors for the Jefferson County Federal Credit Union and the board of directors for the Midwestern Center for Mental Health. And in those capacities, we had a number of problems that arose. And it was very informative and educational for me how the board working together dealt with these problems, which were quite severe. The second part of your question was, what would I do to facilitate, if I recall correctly, and correct me if I didn't hear you properly. And if I understood you correctly, you wanted to know what I'd do to facilitate my relation and functions with you folks.
Constructive and collaborative is the way you asked it again.
And the way I do that, or would do that, is based upon my experience as a member of the board of directors myself. I should add, by the way, that not only did I sit on the board of directors, but a number of committees, and I was also a legislative advisor to a Colorado senator for a while, and as a consequence, I developed certain sorts of attitudes and policies which I tend to follow in dealing with my peers and relations with other people that have great responsibilities, such as you folks do. And it's to, first of all, not point the finger at anybody. There are problems and they need to be solved, and it's our responsibility to look at those problems and come to a common course of action which we can implement to solve those problems. And that's what my experience as a member of the board of directors, as a legislative advisor, as a member of the Judicial Advisory Committee has taught me over and over again. Confrontation doesn't work very well. It's better to sit down and chat with folks a little bit and find out what their thinking is before you start shooting your own mouth off about what your opinion is. In other words, it's always good to know when approaching a problem what others think about what comprises the problem. That's the first step, I think, in solving the problem. Did that answer your question, or did I miss something?
I would clarify by saying, if you have anything you can add regarding working under an analogous body, even if it's not a board of directors, we'd love to hear that piece of it.
Well, when I was with the Jefferson County Sheriff's Department, of course, I was working under the Board of County Commissioners on behalf of the sheriff. I prepared the department's budget for a number of years and presented it on the sheriff's behalf to the Board of County Commissioners. It was a very interesting experience to me. It was my real first experience in the public realm of dealing with issues that aren't just doing what you're told to keep your mouth shut, but actually working in the political sphere where things are public. As a consequence, you have to consider not only what the goal is you're trying to accomplish, but the inadvertent results of things that you might do. And it becomes very important in considering that. For example, when I started with the Jefferson County Sheriff's Department, we had two budgets, a general fund budget and it was called the Law Enforcement Administration budget. Our total budget that year that I first drafted the budget for the previous year had been about $1.9 million. We were way underfunded, way understaffed, desperate for good equipment and so forth. And so my job from the sheriff's point of view was to figure out a way to get some more money for us. By taking this approach and trying to understand and talk to folks first, it taught me how to do that. And if you're curious, I'll tell you what the result was. I more than doubled the budget the first year I wrote it. So I considered that a success, which has somewhat reinforced my approach to these problems to this day.
Thank you, Mr. Bradley.
You're entirely welcome.
Mr. Bradley, the CPOA, or Civilian Police Oversight Agency of Albuquerque, is the office side of the Police Oversight Board. And if you are successful, you will become the director thereof. And so if you become the director thereof, how would you measure the success of the CPOA?
As the director, my job would not be to measure the success of the CPOA, but try try to achieve the goals of the CPOA as in the consent decree that was entered, in the municipal ordinance that was passed, and then this interpretation and understanding of the Civilian Oversight Board is communicated to me. Of course, the consent decree and the municipal ordinance both have specific provisions of responsibilities that the director has. And I would certainly be paying attention to those and trying to accomplish those. But the success of the Civilian Police Oversight Committee is not something that I would want to be judging. What I want to do is be working to help achieve what you understand those goals, principles, and desires and aims are in terms of achieving the resolution of the consent decree and the municipal ordinance that the city council passed and was signed by the mayor.
Thanks.
I'd like to ask a clarifying question. What Dr. Reagan is talking about is this: how would you measure the success of the staff in this process? How would you measure that success, not the POB overall?
I see. Well, there are several kinds of staff, of course, in the Civilian Police Oversight Committee. And you have your support staff, which would be secretarial and so forth. And then you have your investigative staff. As the director, of course, one of my responsibilities would be to create reports on a regular basis concerning certain issues and facts that come before the Civilian Oversight Committee.
The board, yeah.
And if I don't have that information and I don't have the support staff to help me prepare that, then I'd say that they're not performing effectively. I have to take some kind of action to bring them on board, make them part of the team, and make them educated to the point where they would be contributing and providing that information and support in a manner to make me successful, so to speak. Although I don't think of it as my success, but help me succeed in fulfilling my functions in serving you folks.
Mr. Bradley, how do you deal with institutional resistance to change in your role?
That's certainly a big problem that's being faced right now, isn't it? I think I heard a discussion by Mr. Wagner just earlier, in which he was expressing some considerable disapprobation concerning that very thing. In that connection, there's a couple approaches that are possible. You can become an autocratic dictator and just slam your fist on the table and say, this is the way it's going to be. But that doesn't solve the problems that the bureaucratic resistance and traditional ways of doing things created in the first place, does it? So I'd be much more interested in trying to approach people, communicate with them, and seeing how I can say things in such a way that they can tailor what they want to accomplish in such a way that I can accomplish for the board what its goals, duties, and obligations are.
Mr. Bragg,
Yes, sir.
how will you create a strategy for public outreach? What groups will you prioritize for the outreach and why?
Law enforcement over the last few years has faced some very serious problems. And so has the public. One of the problems, and I've just observed this myself, I left law enforcement some time ago, but I just, as an outsider looking in, as an attorney and so forth, I've seen an incredible change in the way law enforcement performs its functions. It seems to me that this is a problem that needs to be solved. How to solve that is, I think, the point of the question you were asking me. There is no easy solution. The other aspect of the problem is, of course, the civilian perception of law enforcement that's resulted in incredible growth of hostility, at least in certain communities, between law enforcement agencies and the community they serve. It seems to me to be a two-sided problem that's going to require a two-sided approach. As the director of the Civilian Police Oversight Committee, as your director, I, of course, am not in a position to tell anybody to do anything. Best I can do is approach them and make suggestions. I looked briefly at the Albuquerque rules of police procedure and so forth, and I see them outlining programs that supposedly involve community action, community interaction. They're not this, they're by, at least by name, they don't seem dissimilar to what we were involved with in Jefferson County when I was there. You had neighborhood watch, you had, we had special deputies, for example, be called out for emergencies. We had a serious crime scene that needed to be secured and so forth. We could call out these special deputies and secure it. Involving the citizenry seemed to keep things pretty smooth. As a matter of fact, just recently here, a few months ago, I was chatting with somebody from Jeffco. I don't know if you folks know where Jefferson County is. It's a county of about 900,000 to the west of Denver. But I just was speaking to somebody who was there, and it really surprised me. She said, no, the Jefferson County Sheriff's Department, they're very friendly, easy to get along with, very polite. Wow, Jeffco hasn't changed. But to get that attitude in between the law enforcement and the community it serves is not going to be easy here at Albuquerque if what I'm reading is true. And I have a hunch that there's a great deal of truth behind it. The reason it's not going to be easy is because, just as you said earlier, there's a lot of institutional resistance to certain types of things. This means it's going to take a lot of very careful communication with the people that are in authoritative positions to make decisions. You can't go around stomping your feet and expect people to like you or do what you want. You've got to persuade them by different means, either by example yourself, by the way you conduct your affairs, the way pointing to positive results of things that have happened that you've managed to achieve for other folks, things like that. Certainly my work as an attorney, I've seen this happen over and over again. It's not an easy thing to do, and I wouldn't want you to think that I think it is easy at all. It's not. I just don't think shouting into an empty room is the way to solve the problem. And that would be the last thing I do. The first thing I do is try to make myself acquainted with the people involved. If I understand the consent decree and the ordinance correctly, in fact, I should be able to do that. Get to know the chief, get to know you folks. You folks are my boss. You're telling me what you expect of me. If you want me to do something specific, I'm sure you tell me straight away without even hesitating. My job then is to act as your intermediary with regard to many other people. In particular, I notice in the ordinances, one of them is the chief of police. And it looks to me, from the way the ordinance is drafted, there may be a problem or two there, because apparently the chief of police isn't bound by anything that the director says or does or finds with regard to any investigation.
Okay.
As a consequence, it's going to take some work.
Yeah, okay, well, thank you.
You're entirely welcome.
Mr. Bradley,
Yes, sir.
based on your review of the DOJ findings letter, settlement agreement / consent decree, and the police oversight ordinance, what do you expect to be some of the primary challenges for the executive director, and how would you plan to address those?
In listening to the questions you just asked me, I think that you've touched on a lot of them. First of all, you have an institution that's well established. It's come under some heavy attack. And the consent decree reflects some of the basis for that attack. I don't think that they reflect all of the historic issues or concerns that exist with regard to this situation. But it seems to me that in maintaining public peace, order, and safety, this anger between the two has to be resolved. Now, how to do that is the question, and you pointed to some of the problems, for example, entrenchment of certain points of view. How to get around that, I think, is the thing that I've tried to address by suggesting to you that I don't think shouting into an empty room or insisting on something or pounding their fist on the table is going to work. So people are going to fall back to their positions and insist that they're right and you're wrong. This means you've got to figure out how to interact with the person who holds the opposite point of view from that, frequently the opposite point of view from that which you hold. This is not an easy thing to do. This means you have to exercise self-control. Frequently, somebody will say something and you'll feel a surge of anger, for example. And what's your first impulse? Tell them where the bear pooped in the buckwheat, right? But we don't do that because that doesn't persuade him of anything or her of anything either. Rather, we start talking about other things that will lead us to a common course of action which will solve the problem. I think that that kind of self-control is essential, and I think I've had it. I think that over the last years that I've been a legislative advisor, a member of a board of directors, an attorney, and a peace officer, have taught me some of the essentials of that. And I think that I would be able to bring all those to bear on the problems that are currently being faced by the Civilian Oversight Agency.
Thank you.
How do you do, sir? I'm Joanna Fine. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you too.
This is your chance to tell us anything else we should have asked you that we didn't. So please let us know if there's anything else you'd like to tell us about yourself.
I saw that question on the form I filled out also. And I sat there and I thought, gee, what can I say? I don't sit on your board, of course. I'm being interviewed by the board to see if I can help you. I happen to think that I'm probably one of the best qualified candidates you're going to encounter in your interviews today. It doesn't mean necessarily that you're going to appoint me or anything, but I do think I'm one of the best qualified. What can I say to persuade you of that? I don't think there's a great deal I can say. You have my resume, you have my background, you have my experience. I think that that should be the basis of your decision-making process, and I encourage you to review it carefully and look it over.
I have a clarification question. There was something in the materials that you said that I got confused about, and so maybe you can shed some light on it. In the list, Elmhurst College and Northern Illinois University, according to this, you went to both of those at the same time.
That's entirely true.
Okay.
I started out at Elmhurst College as an undergraduate, went there 4 years. 1 year. I then transferred to Northern Illinois University in DeKalb, and I went there for 3 semesters. The semesters kind of overlapped. I then went back to Elmhurst, where I enrolled in night school. And I went to night school at Elmhurst College until I was accepted at Southern Illinois University, at which time I left Southern Illinois University. Now, I might have just typed the date or something. Did I just type the date?
Well, Elmhurst, it says 1957 to 1961, and Northern Illinois University says 1958 to 1960.
I see. So what I did is you're right, I gave you bad information. I apologize.
I
I was
just want to
thinking-
make sure.
Yeah, I was thinking, okay, Elmhurst College, I went there, I started in 57, last time I attended was 61. Yeah, I started at 57. 58, I went to Northern Illinois University. 1960, I went back to Elmhurst College, and in 1961, I went to Southern Illinois University.
Okay, there's one other question I wanted for clarification. The work experience, it says public defender from 2003 to the present, and legislative advisor 1997 to 2009. One was in New Mexico, one was in Colorado, so that's, again, I got confused because I didn't know you could be in 2 places at once.
That's undoubtedly my fault. When I was answering those questions, I was lumping things together. Maybe I should have separated out in a little more detail. I started being a legislative advisor to Senator Congo in 1998. And I continued to act as his legislative advisor right up through 2006. He had a heart attack shortly after that, and so we stayed in touch. He passed in 2012. In between that time, I worked, of course, I left Colorado to work for the public defender in Las Cruces. I then went back to Colorado for 2 years and served as assistant county attorney. So from December 2003 through March of 2005, I was in Las Cruces. In March 2005 through January of 2006. That's not right. Okay, it was, I guess, because I was there for almost 2 years, a month or so short of 2 years. But anyways, in December 2006, I then came back down here. And so in answering the questions, I honestly lumped my dates together, and that's.
Sounds like there was a space in between, but you put the beginning and the last end date, is that correct?
I hope I clarified that, yeah, because and I apologize for that.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Anything else that I can answer? Anybody has any questions?
Yes?
I do have a set of clarifying questions, and I've been sitting here trying to decide if it's one question or two, so I'm going to try this one to begin with. So several times as you've been answering questions, you've talked about, and I know these are just figurative, but stomping your feet, shouting into an empty room, pounding your fist on the table. You also talked about the fact that one of your strategies, I'm very interested in the work itself, would be to, more or less put yourself in the shoes of someone else. You can't disrespect your interlocutor and expect to make any progress.
Exactly.
So I just wonder if you could maybe illustrate some of this thing that seems to be really behind so many of your answers, the shouting in an empty room idea, and if you'd butt that up against, if you could, the idea that sometime putting yourself in someone else's shoes in a position that you're talking about, where decisions have to be made and there is a yes or a no at the end of the day, it isn't always enough.
No, it's not. And we don't always achieve all of our goals, or even sometimes not even any of them. The question is the integrity with which you approach the problem. I use those images, perhaps that was ill-chosen, but for example,
I don't know if it's ill-chosen, I just don't know what you mean by it. I mean, it must be something firm in your mind. You mentioned it so many times. So is that?
Well, for example, when I was sitting on a board of directors, some money disappeared, pretty serious money. Now, we're sitting there as the board of directors. Here's our CEO sitting here. And you can imagine the stress in the room as we're trying to talk to him about this problem. He became very angry. Said we were accusing him of committing wrongs and so forth, which we didn't know what had happened. We're trying to find out. We solved the problem, but we didn't do it by shouting back. We did it by standing back and letting him do his shouting and then trying to talk to him. This happens more than one situation. That's why I find it so firmly seated in my own approach to problems. For example, when I first began being a legislative advisor, Senator Congrove was involved with the committee that formed legislation governing warrants, the issuing and execution warrants in Colorado. And he asked me, because of my previous law enforcement experience, and of course because of the fact that at the time I was an attorney, and we'd known each other more than 20 minutes, to help him out with this. The problem was there were vested interests behind the legislation. Now, there are a couple of ways to approach the problem, and I suggested to Senator Gardner the way to approach this problem is not by confronting the opposing opinion, but by pointing out how an interest that they have might be solved by another approach. It took about 8-9 months to get the legislation passed, but it was finally passed. And we passed a bill, or I didn't pass it, Senator Carter got it passed, in which they revised the procedures to be followed for the issuance of warrants and the procedures to be followed on the execution of no-knock warrants. And I have not been involved in Colorado law since 2003, so I'm not sure what's happened in that area. But I know we got the legislation passed. It was quite successful. We didn't do it by standing on opposite sides of the room shouting to come. Matter of fact, one of the more interesting experiences I had was having lunch with Senator Cairo and his opposing thinkers on the matter in a restaurant in Denver. And watching him perform, to me it was fascinating. He was a very skillful politician, very skilled in how to articulate things without angering people, and yet expressing an opposing point of view and getting the other side to look for a resolution of the problem without the necessity of fighting over issues that don't solve the problem.
Thank you, sir.
Any other follow-up questions from POB? Thank you very much. We
Thank you
appreciate
very
your
much.
time.
Thank you, folks,
Thank
for
you.
having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you, and you.
We need a 1-minute break.
Yes.
We're going to take a brief break, folks.
Where-
20 or 16 or?
For one of the low numbers. For cable or yeah, I don't think I can do it.
Okay, let's call the meeting back to order, which would require the members of the Police Oversight Board to stop speaking, since I get to be teacher today, evidently. Mr. Grubasek, welcome. We appreciate your coming.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
Dr.
All
Brown?
right. Good evening, I'm Sue Brown,
Good evening.
and I guess we've all been employees at some time in our lives, and we were wondering what experience that you've had as an employee that's most influenced your way of managing, supervising others.
I think that would have had to be when I was at the Attorney General's office. I was a deputy director of the civil division at the Attorney General's office. And I had previous managerial experience at the DA's office, but not as many as 20. I had 21 attorneys that I managed when I was at the AG's office. And I went from managing 5 attorneys to 21 attorneys. And when you're managing attorneys, it's sort of like herding cats. So that was a big jump for me. So I gained a lot of experience when I was managing that many attorneys. So I think that's where I learned most of my managerial skills, was working at the AG's office and supervising those 21 attorneys, because they all had different needs, different strengths, different weaknesses. So dealing with that many was quite a challenge, and I think that's what really taught me to be able to adapt and to work well with other people.
Was there a specific time when you were an employee, when something happened that really affected the way you managed once you became a manager?
When I was at the district attorney's office, when I first started in the magistrate court unit there, I wasn't hired to manage that unit, but I moved up quickly. I had a very experienced manager ahead of me who taught me and sort of took me under his wing. I think that lawyers sort of get headstrong, and we realize that our way is the best way. And I think one of the things that he sort of took me aside and counseled me and said, look, you need to tone that down a little bit, and that helped a lot to learn. Unfortunately, I didn't adapt to that right away. I think the biggest learning experience I had was when I was in the New Mexico State Legislature. I was a senator. Talk about sort of a double whammy. I was a lawyer and a senator, and I knew everything.
I was gonna fix the world. I rapidly realized that if I wasn't willing to sort of listen to other people and have some humility, I was never gonna get anything accomplished, because if you don't have humility, you don't listen to anyone's ideas necessarily. So I think that was a big learning experience for me in the New Mexico legislature, was when I finally started listening to other perspectives, and taking the time to hear what people were actually saying. I was able to adapt. I had a very successful legislative career once I realized that there were other opinions out there, there were other ideas, there were other avenues that needed to be taken to get things accomplished. And I think that was a big learning experience for me.
Mr. Grubschek?
Grubschek.
Grubschek. I'm Moira Amalakula. So, a two-part question. We'd like you to describe your experience working under the direction of a board or another analogous body. And secondly, some of the strategies, or a piece of that, some of the specific strategies you'd use to ensure constructive and collaborative working relationship, constructive and collaborative with this POV.
One of the jobs I held was I was Mora County attorney for several years. Mora County is a small county up in northern New Mexico. Very politically active. Many of the community members, they would attend the board meetings. So there was a lot of different factions at a lot of these board meetings. There was a lot of different factions on the board itself. So I had to learn to, hone my communication skills with all the members of the board and translate that into dealing with members of the community also. That was a huge learning experience for me, because it was such a political hotbed, so to speak. I mean, there was a lot of issues that were very important to members of the community. There were certain members of the board that were affected significantly by some of these issues. So sort of balancing the board's interests, the community interests, that was a delicate balancing act, and I think I did that successfully. I also was there when there was a transition on the board. There were new board members that were elected, so I went through the whole process again. I wasn't necessarily that board's first choice when the new members came on, but I worked well with them. They kept me for several years after they took over. I think that spoke to the fact that I kept an open mind, kept my communication skills open with all of them, and I did a good job for them. And I'm sorry, the second part of your question?
Right, and that would be a follow-up to it. It's a strategy. So I know the type of political hotbed you're talking about in the recording statement, or in particular, and you say it's a delicate balance. And we just like to maybe hear a specific strategy or how that actually works out. I think you're right to identify it as you have.
I think the biggest thing I learned in that sort of position, and sort of built on the experience I gained in the legislature, was having an ability to listen to all the different stakeholders. We had a very contentious issue in Mora County regarding fracking. It's where you fracture the ground in order to harvest gas, natural gas. This is a very contentious issue. There were several board members that were in favor of it, there were some that weren't. Members of the community the same way. We had some very wealthy landowners that were wanting to do this, other members that weren't. It took a lot of effort to listen to all the different stakeholders, and at times it was very volatile. People would get very upset, but by listening, taking the time to listen to these folks, hearing their concerns, balancing that with my board members' concerns and ideas, I think that we were able to work out a lot of details. The interesting thing was we involved the community a lot. we took a lot of time listening to their concerns, which I commend the commission for doing. A lot of times legislative bodies will decide they're going to take some action and they don't want to necessarily take the time to listen to members of the community. And that's what I think they did so effectively in bridging that gap of dealing with this contentious issue, is they took the time to listen to these folks. And I think the people in the community felt respected because they took that time. I think they felt validated, and I think the commission did a good job moving forward with that issue.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Senator Groupsek, I knew you back then. I need to turn on the microphone. The CPOA, or Civilian Police Oversight Agency, is the office that this is a part of. You, if successful, would become the director of that office. And how would you then measure success for that office?
I think, Doctor, the main thing that I would like to see established again was, when I was at the Attorney General's office, one of the jobs I had was I represented the Law Enforcement Academy Board. At the time, I believe the Law Enforcement Academy was the preeminent training facility in the state of New Mexico for law enforcement. There were some changes that were made that unfortunately changed that significantly. And I think there's some issues that need to be addressed there, but I think that's what I would like to see here happen. I would like to see APD once again be the preeminent law enforcement agency in the state of New Mexico. I would like to see them, and there's a lot of work to get them back there. You know, the members of our law enforcement are down. I think there's around 800 active members. We need to reestablish the fact that, you know, this is our largest city. We need to have the best, most professional police force in the state. That would be my ultimate goal, making sure that, you know, APD was viewed as the most preeminent law enforcement institution in our state.
How will you create a strategy? I'm sorry, I'm asking the wrong question here. Number 4.
Oh, sure, you can.
Okay.
No.
How will you deal with institutional resistance to change?
That's a very good question, and I've dealt with that in the past. I've been a very headstrong liberal Democratic state senator who became moderate over my career, I believe, and accomplished some things without abandoning my constituency. But the strategy I utilized was I listened to different views. I took the time to analyze the problem from different angles and look at them. I dealt with a lot of reluctance when I was at the Law Enforcement Academy Board. We had several entities that were very reluctant to allow any type of oversight. The Law Enforcement Academy Board, one of the jobs that they did was decertification of officers. We met a lot of resistance from various law enforcement agencies throughout the state of New Mexico in complying with requests for materials regarding officer misconduct. There was sort of a real insular situation with different agencies sort of hiding the ball with us. What I did a lot of times was I would go out to these various communities and try to establish relationships. Instead of just saying, okay, we're the Law Enforcement Academy Board, we can do this and this is what we're continue to do, we're gonna do this. I would actually go out to these different communities, and they were far from communities. I went to Jal, Eunice, some of the garden spots in the state. And developed relationships with folks, got to know them, got to know their concerns. I brought those concerns back to the board, and I think we developed a way to work together. I wasn't as successful as I wanted to be. There was a lot of reluctance, but I think if we can sort of manage that same sort of idea with, there's several different stakeholders here that we're gonna have to deal with. I think if we can keep the lines of communication open, I think if we can keep things as transparent as possible so we can develop trust, I think that's a key, is developing trust between all the different stakeholders. That, you know, we have a common goal. We want to make sure that APD becomes, you know, the preeminent law enforcement institution in the state. That's the common goal. We want to get back there. We're not there yet, but I don't see why anyone would want to fight us on that. I think it's a common goal that we should all want to do. It's going to be difficult, but I think we need to keep the lines of communication open, and we need to develop trust. I don't think we're there yet, and it's going to take a significant amount of time, but I think we can get there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, one of our goals is public outreach. How will you create a strategy for public outreach? What groups would you prioritize for the outreach and why?
I've seen, you know, I've seen some of the billboards that we've put up and things like that. I think that we do need to get media more involved. I think that's going to be a gradual process, though. I think the first step is we're going to have to get the community to believe in this body first, that we're serious about holding officers accountable. I think once we can establish that, you know, officers are going to be held to high standards, we are going to take action against officers. If there is misconduct, we are going to seriously investigate allegations. I think if we can establish credibility in this body first, I think, you know, the second strategy is going to fall into place after that. I think, you know, we'll get the media to buy in more behind it. I think that more members of the community, you know, there are a lot of folks that show up for these meetings, but I think once they see that we're a viable board and we're serious about what we're doing and we are taking action, I think we'll get more buy-in from the community. And I think that's the first step we need to establish, that this board is serious, that we are going to hold officers accountable, and we're going to move forward. Thank you.
Mr. Grubsick,
Yes, sir.
based on your review of the DOJ findings letter, the settlement agreement / consent decree, and the police oversight ordinance, what do you expect to be some of the primary challenges for the executive director, and how do you plan to address these?
I think one of the biggest challenges we're going to have right out of the box is making sure that there's a streamlined process that members of the community feel comfortable in coming forward and making complaints against officers. I think that we need to make sure that there is a good procedure in place so members of the community do feel comfortable in coming forward. I think once that takes place, that we do have that streamlined system, then the next step that has to dovetail into that is then, as executive director, I need to take action on those complaints. I think my experience as both a prosecutor and a defense attorney, I know how to set up an investigation, how to interview witnesses, how to talk to them, how to make sure that, okay, there is something here. We need to go forward with this. We need to concentrate in this area and go forward. I think that those two instances, making sure we have a streamlined process where people feel safe in coming forward and then taking actions on those complaints, that's the biggest challenge. I think, you know, once we can show the community that their complaints are going to be taken seriously, that law enforcement individuals are going to be held accountable, I think that that's going to take care of a lot of the problem, but we're not there yet. I think that I need, the biggest challenge is to make sure that we have a good streamlined process in place, and I'm not familiar with it enough yet, but I want to make sure that that's sort of my out of the box. The first thing I want to do, make sure we have a very streamlined process, meet with the stakeholders and make sure that there's a clear understanding of this is how it's going to go forward, so they feel comfortable with that. I mean, I think that's the other part of this deal is, you know, law enforcement has to feel comfortable that we're not necessarily just out to get law enforcement, that we're doing serious investigations and we're holding people accountable as a result of those serious investigations. So I think we need to get buy-in from law enforcement also that we're a real entity and that we're working very hard to make sure that, you know, we're here to help them be better law enforcement officers. And I think the way to do that is to hold those officers that aren't better law enforcement officers accountable for their actions. Thank you.
Hi there, I'm Joanne Fine, it's nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Last question from this group is what did we forget to ask you? Anything else you'd like to tell us to help us assist us in our decision making?
You know, one of the most interesting parts of my job as both a prosecutor and a defense attorney is I've had the opportunity to work with many officers in completely different situations. I mean, but I've seen how much it matters to have an excellent law enforcement officer. As a DA, I loved presenting cases when I had an officer that did everything he was supposed to do and all the I's were dotted and the T's were crossed. It was a dream to put that kind of case together. On the other hand, as a defense attorney, I have to say it was a lot of fun taking apart a case when I didn't have an officer dot the I's and cross the T's. So I've seen how much it matters to have a professional, competent law enforcement officer. And that's what I'd like to see us establish here in Albuquerque is let's get back to the place where, well, let's get to the place where we have the most preeminent, most professional law enforcement institution in our state. And I think that's an achievable goal, but we're gonna have to get a lot of buy-in from a lot of different entities. We're gonna have to develop trust with all those different groups. I think it's something we can do, but it's gonna take some time to get there. I think the first step is we need to let the community and law enforcement know that we're serious and that we're going to proceed as quickly as we can, but as cleanly and as professionally as possible. It's going to be a fair process, but we are going to take action. We're going to move forward.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Does anybody else have any questions?
Any follow-up to anything else or any questions off of the writing assignment? Okay. Thank you very much, sir. We appreciate your time very much.
Thank you. Have a good night.
You too.
Thank you.
Time filter. Here's the time filter. Getting better.
So you guys, if you have a Robin aunt, you want to just set it aside because she wasn't able to, she took another job.
Right. Do that.
Yeah, Robin Otten took another job, so we're just skipping her and continuing. So Jay Rowland will be our next person. Make sure you're on the right score sheet.
Thank you.
Okay. Our next interview will be Mr. Jay Rowland.
Yeah, thank you.
Hello?
Welcome. Well, we're gonna go around the room and ask you some questions. We'll start with Ms. Brown.
Good evening.
Hi.
The first question we wanted to ask you is, since we've all been employees at some time in our lives, we were wondering what experience that you've had that made the biggest impact on you as you became a supervisor of other people, a manager. What kind of employee experience made a big impact?
Well, I spent 30 years in the Air Force, so starting at the bottom of the legal profession. And I actually learned a lot from negative experiences. You don't have to have a boss that is super to learn from, although those are great, but my first ones were not so super. And I learned how to treat people better and still get the work done from them.
Hi, Mr. Rowland. I'm Laura Otmont McCoy. I had a two-part question. We're hoping you'll describe your experience working under the direction of another board or an analogous body. So working under the direction of another board. And then some of the strategies that you use in that situation to ensure constructive and collaborative working relationship with that body.
Well, as you probably know, and I guess everybody really should know watching this, I was the IRO here from 2002 to 2007, so I worked with the Police Oversight Commission. Again, full disclosure, I don't know how many of you read the input that I had to the questions, but I took an awful lot of credit for what Beth Moore, my top investigator, did, and that's just fair to say. With the Police Oversight Commission, I knew right away they were my boss. So I had to work very closely with them, had to give them as much information as I possibly could so they could make decisions. And that's going to be one of your problems, even with this format. You have to be able, you're only going to be able to make as good a decisions as the information you get. So the evidence you get is critical. So as I started this letter to the citizen complainants and tried to summarize the evidence that was in what the investigators came up with in the case file of the complaint, so that the Police Oversight Commission could have something to try to make a decision on. If you cannot get the Garrity statements, what do you base your decisions on? So I see it as my job to try to get you the best information you possibly can legally. And legally means whatever the politicians will allow you to have. But if you can get those Garrity statements, then you can make a lot better decisions than what my summaries allowed you to go from. Because, I mean, my summary, how much do you trust it? And am I slanting? You know, is the chief slanting when he talks to you about it? far better to have the Garrity information that you can get and be able to, it'd be really nice if you could speak to the individuals, but you're not gonna get that. We never had one police officer show up to talk, at least about his case. They would show up to talk about other things and support police that were, you know, potentially, the Police Oversight Commission was gonna, you know, hold them accountable for something. So they would have lots of them show up for that, and they would speak in favor of other people, but they would never show up to speak about their own case. That would be wonderful, so you can judge credibility. It would be wonderful if you could talk to the citizen complainants, so you can judge credibility. But you can only do what the politicians give you. But I will try to get you the best information I can.
So just so I understand, if you do your job well in that office, providing good information, that will lead to a good collaborative and constructive working relationship.
Absolutely, hope so.
Thank you.
Mr. Rowland, oh, excuse me. Computer blocked my view of the microphone. Mr. Rowland, I don't have to explain to you as I have to the others what CPOA means. But if you become the director of this agency and this office that it represents, how will you measure success?
You're in a totally different position than I was when I was the second IRO. So it had only been in existence for a year. I think you're in a position where the credibility of the Police Oversight Board and the CPOA is that's key. And how do you get that? So that is the most important thing that you have to do and that I have to do and my community relations person is going to have to do. I envision that you and I will be out at all these public hearings where it's being talked about. Maybe not all of you at the same time, but some of you, it sounds like APD is going to have a bunch of you know, citizen complaint times where they can come out and talk, and you're going to hold some, and whoever holds those, I need to be there, one or two of you need to be there, and you need to be willing to talk to the media, to the people, and definitely you have to listen to them. Let me just give you a little background on me. Coming from the Air Force for 30 years, we never talked to the media. We always let the public affairs officer do it. We gave them the information, and we were told, you don't talk to the media. And that was kind of my plan when I came into the police, to the IRO job. I wasn't going to talk to the media. They're going to give you the false story anyway. You know, that's just what you hear. Things got I'd say so bad, I guess, but so difficult between the chief at the time and me, and getting information and trying to get him to do the right thing, and that I had to break that. And it was very hard for me to suddenly become a media person. But I did, because if you don't get out there and talk to the people about the problems that APD is having, then nobody's going to believe you when you sit up here and make pronouncements. I had a hard time overcoming that just because of my background, but I think I stirred the pot quite a bit in my time. And I could go over some of those things with you, and I hope to, because I understand I'm going to get a chance to talk at the end. I have save your time, I got lots to say. But if you have trouble getting up and talking in front of the media and the camera in your face, I ask you, please get over it, because I think you being out there, me being out there, probably not your attorney being out there, but you know, that's going to be very important.
Thank you.
how will you deal with institutional resistance to change?
Well, APD doesn't like to change. And APD, I have cousins that are police officers. They don't like civilian police oversight. They don't like internal affairs. They don't like anybody looking at it. So that's probably never going to change. I mean, I usually start at the bottom and try to work up. You know, whoever the problem was, I try to go through maybe internal affairs, go to the chief, go to captains, try to get them to see my point of view. But again, in my case, after we found out that basically the Police Oversight Commission was just a sham, none of the decisions they made went into the officers' records. The chief could change, according to the city attorney, the chief could change anything he wanted to. He could change police shooting cases from sustained to exonerated. He could change CPCs from sustained to exonerated. He could do that anytime he wanted. Those were city attorney opinions that I forced, got the POC to say, give us an opinion. And that's the opinion the city attorney gave us. Then I had to go to the city council and get the ordinance changed. I mean, it's best not to have to go all that way because it's very time consuming and very, gets a lot of people upset. And if you could do it without that, I would definitely do that. But I'm not afraid, obviously, to go to the map and take it back to the city council. I'm going to have several suggestions to you that you may have to do the same thing. I'm going to try to get it all out now in case I don't get another chance.
Thank you, Mr. Rowland, for being here. You briefly touched on public outreach. How will you create a strategy for public outreach? What groups will you prioritize for the outreach and why?
How am I going to prioritize it? Well, I'm going to hire somebody that's going to be a lot smarter than me. You surround yourself with people who are smarter than you, like Beth Moore. I'm going to hire somebody that knows the community and will be able to give me that strategy. But you have to go everywhere. So I would have, he's going to have to, or he or she, whoever's going to be, he's going to have to set forth a plan that I'm going to approve, and then we're going to bring to you and have you approve about how we think best to do it. But I think it's also important that all those APD things that are going on throughout the commands, that we be at those as well.
Thank you.
Mr. Rowland, based on your review of the DOJ findings letter, the settlement agreement / consent decree, and the police oversight ordinance, one, what do you expect to be some of the primary challenges for the executive director? And two, how do you plan to address those?
Well, as I said, the very first challenge has got to be getting credibility with the people back. So how do you do that? Police shooting cases are the absolutely most important thing to go on with the police force, and that you should be looking at, and I should be looking at. So back in my day, my first police shooting case I got was 4 years old. Ridiculous. Ridiculous. I don't know how fast they get them out now, but I know other places do it fast. They suspend their officers until the case is completed through the district attorney's office, and there's no grand jury indictment. If there is, obviously they don't go back to work. But getting that system down fast, because it's going to have to go, and I say 60 days. It's not been, when I was here doing that, the ME was they do the interviews right away of all the police officers. then the ME stands by, and there may be some other scientific and other type evidence they have to get, but 60 days to me is a reasonable amount of time to expect the investigation to be completed, absent exigent circumstances. And I know you just had a case where the prosecutor had to send some stuff out to Los Angeles, so you knew which bullet came from which gun that killed the homeless man. So there's things that, but at some point, and I'd say at the 60-day point, you need to be involved. Chief, what's going on? And I'd be your guy to run in, and he's got to keep me posted, and then we come to you after 60 days and explain why is it not done? Because it should be done. You better have a good reason. So getting into police shooting cases is extremely important. And you being involved in it, me being involved in it. And when I tried to do some of that when I was IRO, they said, well, you're interfering with the police investigation. Don't want to interfere with the police investigation, but I sure want to know what's going on. So you need to be involved in that process, and we need to work with the chief so he can do that. And then the district attorney, she needs to get it to the grand jury. Need to get it to the grand jury. There's no reason it should go over 30 days at the grand jury. Again, you can have exigent circumstances. I would try to be the liaison there. She's probably not going to show up to tell you why that's not working. But and then after that, if it finally gets through the grand jury, that's when I get the case, analyze it, present it to you, and you make findings. And I want to say something here that as a lawyer, I'm used to having different decisions coming out of different bodies because they see different evidence, and maybe the standard of proof is different. You're not going to get to know what went on at the grand jury. Old saying in the legal profession is that the DA could indict a ham sandwich if they wanted to. So the grand jury is run by the DA, and the DA can do whatever she wants or he wants, and they get to, and you don't get to know what happened. So just because they might say, free and clear, not, exonerated, no criminal stuff, that doesn't mean that has to be your decision, because you're looking at different evidence. Puts pressure on you, but you're looking at different evidence. You're only going to get the evidence, again, that the politicians allow you to see. And you got to make your best shot there.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Joanne. It's nice to meet you.
I have a clarifying question first and then the open question, okay? Because of your unique experience, I'd like to know how you see the difference in the value of the new ordinance versus the old one, since you operated under the old one.
The new organization versus the old one?
The ordinance that created them, yes, and the powers that exist.
This is far superior. This is a great opportunity. I mean, we never had a chance to look at Garrity's statements. And I had two detectives, two investigators, and one admin person. You have, fortunately, the people that have came after me have expanded it, and they've got good people, I'm sure, in there to do investigations and do analysis and see where, make recommendations of where you look. This is far superior. And, however, it's only as good as we make it. You have to be willing to buy into it. And I know I do. I came from the Air Force where I saw the value of the Inspector General system. Every government organization, as far as I'm concerned, should have an oversight function, somebody over them to check into them. I don't care whether it's the police, or the fire department, or the jail, or the city clerk. somebody should always have the opportunity to look in and see how they're doing from a fair and impartial standpoint. And that's what, in the Air Force, our Inspector General did. That, as well as take complaints and then investigate them. You know, a lot of huge Inspector General investigations where one case we cleared out the entire command of a very important wing in the Air Force.
Thank you. Here's my other question, the one I was assigned to ask you. This is the open-ended one, so get ready. Okay, are you ready?
This is the one where I get to tell you everything I want?
Yes.
Oh, let me pull my
Please add anything else you'd like to tell us that will assist us in making this decision.
What was that again?
Please add anything else that we didn't ask you, or you'd like to add, expound as you wish, to help us make this decision.
I actually applied for this job the last time the IRO position came open, but did not make the interview. So I'm going to make the most of this in case I don't get a chance. But I'm happy to tell these things that I'm about to tell you and go into far more detail with any of you and your attorney afterwards. I'm not going to make my plane tonight, but I'll be around a few days later, and I come back to Albuquerque a lot because to me it's really home. I'm going to start with the small stuff first, and then get down to where the last one will be what I think is most important. I could never get the chiefs to put civil and criminal cases into the officer's record. So if an officer is sued, that should have been in his record. So if it was even if he gets off, I don't care. It should be in there that there was a lawsuit brought and whatever the judgment was. If there was a monetary judgment, it should show what the monetary judgment was. All that helps our analysts to find out which officers need additional training. Same thing with criminal cases. You know, if they have a criminal case brought against them, then we need to know that too, and it should be in their record. So we should have any type of lawsuit brought against an officer in the record in detail, so you don't dismiss for nothing that you don't get hold it against them. There's no reason to hold it against them. But if you get a judgment against them, then how much? Because sometimes it's zero. Yeah, he used excessive force. We give him $1 or zero, and that's a big difference from $1 million or 100,000 or whatever. So that shows the people that are reviewing the records the seriousness of what that case is. When I was IRO, the city attorney's policy, where there was a civil verdict against an officer, so for unreasonable use of force, called $100,000, called $1 million. That doesn't matter what the amount was, but usually a large amount. The city attorney's position, what they did, and I hope they don't do this still, but they did at the time, and the whole time I was there, they would go to the defense and say, we will not appeal if you drop it against the officer. So the judgment comes out against the city makes the judgment, but there's no judgment against the officer. That needs to be changed. And that needs to be in the officer's record. So you have some judgments, you can base things, predict future things, or maybe he needs to have more retraining or something. But those things need to be in the officer's record. I talked about police shooting cases, and again, don't be afraid to make a different decision because you have different evidence. You just have to keep track of these police shooting cases, and then hold them accountable to do a quick investigation. And then when you get the evidence, make a decision. And I would say as fast as you can put it on the docket. I don't know if they still have to wait a month, advertise it a month, and you have to wait a month. But as fast as you can get it on there. And then you got to listen to people. You're going to have lots of people that disagree with what happened, but you got to listen to them, or you get no credibility. And then you got to make the decision, best you can. I noticed in the DOJ report that they called the two IRO successors to me. They said they were too forgiving of APD. They didn't go back into my reign of terror. So, but they might have said the same thing. So I think it's worth addressing that. I had to go public, as I told you, against my training and tradition. And it was serious because I couldn't let this stand without the public knowing about it. So I went to the city council. I told them that the chief had overturned 2 sustained shooting cases. I looked at the shooting cases. They should have been sustained. One of them was a moving vehicle. You know, you're not supposed to shoot at moving vehicles unless he's coming right at you. And then they overturned a citizen police complaint that was sustained. So again, went to the city attorney. He said that's perfectly okay. Chief could do that anytime. Well, you know, I couldn't just lay back and not bring that to the public's attention. So I brought it to the POC's attention. I went on camera with TV, and I went on newspaper reporters, and basically made myself a pain to the powers that be. I also told the city attorney and the city council, the POC, that the chief at the time never found a case of unreasonable use of force, in spite of all the times I found unreasonable use of force. He never found unreasonable use of force. I warned him at the time that this going to be money. You're going to get municipal liability, and when you start looking at it where it looks like the city is not paying attention to this stuff, the verdicts are going to go up. Then I asked the city attorney to give a legal opinion through the POC. All this goes through the POC, through you guys, whatever we want to do something to go through you. So when I say aye, you bring it to your attention, and then you just say yea, verily, or no. But I found out the findings were not being put in this Police Oversight Commission. So if you made a finding, those decisions did not go into the officer's record. I asked the city attorney about that. I said, city attorney, you got this whole ordinance here that says that. He says, there's nothing in a totally separate system. You're nothing that the POC does goes into this record, officer's record. So then I had to go to through the city council and had to negotiate with the union, and the union and I ended up being the prime negotiator for the Police Oversight Commission. We came to some agreements, give and take, always with the negotiations, and we came up with a better police oversight ordinance that stopped all those bad things that the city attorney said were perfectly legal. I don't know if you ever heard of the prisoner transfer stations. We had lots of complaints about prisoner transfer stations, the way that people were being treated there. What it was is the police came up with basically it was just a couple prefab trailers, and they would put lots and lots of people together in there, and then they'd have to wait a long time before they transferred them up to the new jail. This is when the old jail went away and the new jail went up there. And first time I read a complaint, I thought it was laughable. I said, this can't possibly be true. So my investigators and I, we staked out the prisoner transfer center. Lo and behold, it was all true. Every complaint, exactly the way they treated people so poorly, was true. The chief closed it down the same day I went before the POC to tell them about it. So it was closed down immediately after that. How about the evidence room? Anybody hear about the evidence room scandal? No? Nobody? That was Mayor Chavez asked me to investigate all the complaints that were going on about the evidence room and the allegations of cover-up and wasting lots of money. And I did that report and provided it to the public, and the mayor was able to make decisions off of that. Now, here's the most important thing. You need to get the Garrity statements. If you can get those as promised, then that'll be a huge step. I have a big issue that nobody's going to like to hear, but it makes great sense. Another system needs to be created to provide police officers confidentiality. I had a lieutenant come to me, APD lieutenant, and tell me about the chief overturning these cases. And she just thought it was wrong, it shouldn't be done. I had to promise her that I would not tell anybody that she had come and told me this information. I had no ability to give confidentiality. I had no ability, no legal authority to give whistleblower status. Somebody needs to be able to get these police officers who want to tell you something very important, to give them confidentiality so they are not destroyed. The blue code of silence, you know, this lady ended up going to the chief and saying, hey, I just told the IRO all this stuff, and by the way, I'm retiring. Couldn't work for the organization after that. But not everybody is retirement eligible, and they need a way to vent. They need a way to come and so somebody can assess their credibility. There's lots of ways to put that system together. It doesn't have to come through the POB or the executive director. It could go to the IG for the city. There's lots of ways to set it up, but I think it's important to set up. I had lots of police officers call me and say they wanted to file a complaint. I said, I can't take complaints from police officers. You have to go to IA. That's the same thing in this ordinance. You can't take a complaint from a police officer. You have to go to IA. They don't trust IA. IA is an arm of, they feel that IA is an arm of the chief. And they're going to get in trouble, and then the chief has targeted them. And they want to tell some important facts that I never learned. Your ordinance, our ordinance, you had to sign, so you knew who was making the complaint. Now, there is anonymity. So those officers who don't trust IA have another option. They can make an anonymous complaint that we will have to investigate. And we're not going to be able to assess their credibility because we can't interview them. We don't know who they are. Our investigators are not going to get enough facts from them to where we know where we can go with this and follow through. So you're cramping the style. I had 2 cases where police officers, another officer was complained about, he denied it, one-on-one, but another officer stepped forward and said, no, that what he's saying is not true. And I never was able to follow through to see whether those people got in trouble with the department. You know, the blue code of silence, you don't rat out your partner. But if you have a system of confidentiality set up to where somebody can look, you know, interview this person, assess credibility, get leads, and decide whether to follow through with it or not. But that's going to happen. You're going to get cases from police officers anonymously, and we're going to have to investigate. Let me give you another real-world scenario that goes, hopefully, to get you to think this is a good idea, and get the city councilors to think this is a good idea. Election year. all the city councilors, everybody in the city up for election. You got competition, every district, and the mayor, and everybody's in political campaign mode. I get a call from a person who says, I have heard this rumor that X was stopped for DWI by this police officer, and he let him go because of his clout. I said, well, put it in writing and have somebody sign it and I'll look into it. They never did that. So I don't know whether it's true or not. But now I will be looking into it because it'll be anonymous. And for you politicians out there, I hope this gives you fear, not good ideas for what you're going to do in the next election. But it is true, we will be looking into that. And we will not be investigating the city councilor. We'll be investigating the police officer. So, and somehow I'll bet that'll get to the attention of the press. That's, I think, is very important. I think that's all I have.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for the
Appreciate it.
opportunity.
Thank you.
So we have a decision to make. We have one more person. Can we get through one more person and do our dinner break while we're
Yeah.
tallying scores and that? Yeah, okay. I just want to make sure no one's going to faint or anything, right? Okay. Can we ask Ms. Sprague to come in, please? Welcome. Thank you for your patience.
Of course.
We went in alphabetical order.
Ah, all
At
right.
least something you
Not by my
experienced your
first
whole
name.
life. Right?
Yes, exactly.
We're going to go around the room and each board member will ask you a question.
All right, thank you.
We'll begin with Ms. Brown.
Well, welcome.
I'm
Thank you.
Brown. The first question is, what experience as an employee most has impacted the way you manage others?
That's a great question. I think that I initially I've always been a little bit of a free spirit, and so as an employee I sort of was a free spirit and certainly abided by the rules, but didn't necessarily realize how much heartache I was causing the people above me, just in terms of sort of day-to-day organizational skills and sort of management skills. And so when I became a supervisor, I realized how much heartache I had given my previous bosses for things that were seemingly unimportant, but when you're managing a large group of people become extremely important. And so as a result of sort of that own recognition in myself, I have tried to impress upon people why I am talking to them about putting their timesheets in, for example. So even those those little things that don't seem important but do and can demonstrate an ethic, I really try to encourage all my staff and younger attorneys, for example. I supervise a lot of young attorneys. Just kind of to impress upon people that even those little things are things that can become important and are skills that you should institutionalize just in your own role as an employee or a supervisor.
Hi, Ms. Rod, my name is Moira Mollencourt.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you. So a two-part question. We're hoping you'll describe your experience working under the direction of a board of directors or an analogous body. And side by side with that, what are some of the strategies you employ to ensure a constructive and collaborative working relationship between yourself and that body?
I think my most analogous experience is when I was working at New Mexico Legal Aid, and New Mexico Legal Aid was run by a board, and we, within that structure, and I sort of talked about this a little bit in the answer to the questionnaire, but we were also unionized, and so you had a union body, you had a collective bargaining agreement, and then you had the board, and then you had the management staff of the organization, and it was a statewide organization. So you had very different needs just in terms of resource management from north to south. We had a Native American program that had very different needs. And the intersection between all of those people could be, just in terms of efficiency, could be challenging. And for me, something that I've found the most important, and this is a little bit of a cliche, but listening. And you have to individually sort of identify what each people have a commitment to, and be able to restate to them their commitment so that you're acknowledging whatever their interest is without placing judgment on it. And my style particularly, I was at one point the president of the union, and we were under some financial strain at New Mexico Legal Aid, and so we had to do we were forced into collective bargaining over some layoffs. And that's a very intense situation, and so you have to identify what everyone's commitment is, listen to the entire group, and try to identify shared goals. So, for example, in New Mexico Legal Aid, it was providing civil legal services to indigent people. So even though we're all representing different parties, we're representing the union, we're representing management, we're representing the board, we're representing potentially federal interests because you're being managed by a legal services corporation. At the end of the day, if everyone agrees that they have this shared commitment to providing legal services, then you're getting everyone to buy in, and it's not something that people can disagree with. And so you start out with everyone agreeing that there is this common goal. And my experience there, but also in my job now, is if I can get people to talk about what a common goal is, even if they don't know that it's a common goal, but if you start to get people to buy into that common goal, people can't disagree about that common goal. And so you're starting from a place of agreement. And I think that that tends to make people a little bit relaxed and feeling a little bit less vulnerable, because they're trusting the other person that they have a shared goal.
Beautiful, thank you.
Ms. Sprague, I'm Dave Ray.
Nice to meet you.
And the CPOA, or Civilian Police Oversight Agency, is an office of which this is one manifestation thereof. But you're going to be working with the staff and others besides us, and you'll be in charge of the whole ball of wax if you get it. How would you measure success? How would you know if you're doing a good job?
I think that for me, something that is really important is that every person in a job, whether they're in the legal context or a runner, they're taking legal documents to the courthouse, all the way to the boss, everyone has to feel ownership in their job, pride in their job, and that they are being supported in whatever way that they most need it. And so going back to this idea of a shared commitment, when you're able to praise, I think, is sort of simplistic, but praising people in each of their roles and recognizing each person's valuable role. So for example, support staff, my joke to my support staff is the secretaries really are the ones that run the show. And so I have to be able to have them trust me, come to me if there are breakdowns or problems so that I can address them quickly. trust that they are communicating with with the people that they have to work for. Trust is integral because if I'm having to delegate, I have to trust that each person along that chain, whatever their role is buying into the process, buying into the common goal, and is proud of their job. And for me, that's how I measure success. I think it's incredibly difficult, and I'm not always good at it. And some days I'm better at it than others, but for me, that's really how I measure success, is not, because I don't look at any situation as a one up, one down. If I win, you lose. If you win, I lose. I just don't see things in that fashion. And I very much try to get, I think everyone's gonna have points in any situation where they're not feeling like they're getting everything that they want. But just because they're not getting what they want doesn't mean that it's not successful. And so, and I found that listening and getting people to buy into a common goal is the best way to share that overall success.
Thank you.
How will you deal with institutional resistance to change?
So, back when I was in college, I struggled quite a bit with this idea of what kind of a rabble-rouser was I? Was I the kind who, protested and sort of civil disobedience outside of the system, versus a phrase that one of my professors, I guess, bestowed upon me was this idea of a gorilla in the bureaucracy. And not a gorilla like the ape, but somebody who's constantly trying to affect change in a way. I think both types of change can be positive, but for me, this idea of being within the system was really important to me, and that was something that I very much identified with. And when I think a good example, if I may, is when I started working with the district attorney's office 10 years ago, I was hired solely to prosecute domestic violence cases, misdemeanor domestic violence cases. And at the time, the track record in Metropolitan Court with prosecution of domestic violence cases was abysmal. And a lot of it was training and a lot of it was attitude. And it was training with APD, and it was training with staff, and it was training with attorneys, it was training with judges, it was just sort of, the grind. How do you train people and have them just respond? And one of the things that became very important to me was to going back to this idea of getting people to buy into the common goal, and that each person has a different way of having an impact on that larger goal, but having a larger goal, having a larger commitment, a larger mission statement, if you will, and really pushing people. But the most important thing to that kind of change, to that kind of a discussion, is trust. And if people don't trust that I have my certain level of ethic or ideology, and I'm not transparent about what that is, and I'm not clear about what that is, then there is no trust. And the best example for me is I worked very hard to start training members of the Albuquerque Police Department, just on basic sort of interaction with victims of domestic violence and talking about dynamics of domestic violence and what do victims look like and what does victimology sound like. And at first, and I've done a lot of law enforcement training, so the resistance was not specific to APD, but at first people were like, who are you? Who are you to come in and tell us anything about what we're doing? But I kept at it, and over the years I've built up the trust and I've maintained my own vision, I guess, of how I approach those types of cases, that I've built up that credibility. And it has taken me 10 years, and it's challenged, I am challenged all the time by various law enforcement agencies and people within, the community and within my office, but my vision has stayed the same, and my ability to be clear about my own goals, I think has set the tone. Hi.
Part of our goal is public outreach. how will you create a strategy for public outreach? What groups will you prioritize for that outreach and why?
I think that certainly given the crisis that I feel like the city is in terms of the relationship between the police department, the mayor's office, the brass, if you will, in the community is whose voices are being given weight. And when you, for whatever reason, are not making people feel as though their voices are given the same weight, it doesn't matter how much you believe you're giving them the same weight if they're not having that same sense of participation. And I think that some of the meetings that were going on around the city were really great. But I think that you can often have sort of a backlash where people they think, well, why, for example, why should I vote? It doesn't change anything. And so I think that one of the strategies is that I think initially any plan for public outreach is going to have that, I guess, element of non-popularity. Who's going to come? What are they going to say? And I think that you have to have sort of short, quick, measurable, objectively measurable responses to whatever issues are raised. So even if it's, issuing a press statement or I can't think of anything else, but you have to have sort of quick, measurable responses that don't disregard whatever was said at that meeting. And I think that I have experience in those kinds of statements mainly because in my job as a prosecutor, I'm dealing with victims every single day. And victims come in all different shapes, sizes, states of mind, goals, perceptions, and you have to be able to quickly winnow down what their commitment is, going back to this idea, what their commitment is and how can you reflect that commitment to them in a way that is about you hearing what they have to say. And it can be very simple. It doesn't have to be a huge expense to yourself, but having really quick, measurable responses. And so I think that as you build those up, people start seeing the trust and seeing that their voices do count. And I think that you have to do a lot of outreach in communities and populations that aren't necessarily being given any kind of voice. And I think it's hard because I think there is this sort of tendency to say, well, why vote if nobody's listening? But I would hope that through incremental, short-term focus that would change.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Sprague, based on your review of the DOJ findings letter, the settlement agreement / consent decree, and the police oversight ordinance, what do you expect to be some of the primary challenges for the executive director, and how do you plan to address those?
Well, I think very clearly and sort of obviously the primary challenges are these three sort of distinct groups. So you have the law enforcement community, you have sort of the city government, and even to some extent you guys are part of that in a minor sense, and then you have the community. So I think you have potentially these three big different groups, and then you have each of these sort of smaller subsets. I mean, even within the settlement agreement, there are all these different sort of parallel structures that left me sort of wondering, how do you, I don't know, herd cats? I mean, I don't know how you herd cats, but I have cats and I have a lot of them, and food helps. But also, again, and I hate to sound repetitive, but really identifying a common goal. And when you're able to identify a common goal, you can bring people to the table. And something that I've learned, again, over my life is about listening and about conveying to people that I'm listening. And that's something that I'm mostly pretty good at, I think. Not always if I'm tired, but I believe that when you really give people 100% of your attention, and really focus your intent on them, then some of those other barriers tend to fall away a little bit. And I think that the biggest challenge that I see is the acrimony, and I read the journal, I don't watch the news, but I am aware, you know, I work in the district attorney's office, I am obviously aware of some of the stuff that's been going on, and for me, it sort of breaks my heart. I'm from New Mexico, I'm from Albuquerque, and I've, you know, worked in this community for a long time, and I love this community, and I think that that's my commitment, and I think that all of us who are here have that same commitment. And each of us have very different perspectives about how that commitment is reflected. But again, coming back to identifying common commitments, and I think that there are some techniques like in mediation that we use where we do shuttle mediation, where one person is over here by themselves and another person is over here by themselves, and each side doesn't hear what the other one's saying, and the mediator is the person who goes back and forth. Because the mediator is the person who's able to sort of parse out some of the emotion, or separate out the emotion, but identify those common commitments. And that's been something that I think is really effective in highly volatile situations that I've worked, negotiated, for example, with victims and offenders. This was in the context of family law, so ex-spouses, but that's something that can be effective because it's not people screaming at each other, which is never going to get you anywhere. Sometimes it happens, and I think everyone can recognize that that's a relief valve, but you still have to come back to the table, and you still have to be able to identify that common goal and that common value. And I think that one of the neat things about all of the stuff that's been happening in the city in the last couple of years is that every person I've talked to, and I talk to a lot of different people, I'm not just speaking to law enforcement, but other community members, is that everyone has a commitment to this city and to the future. And that's really cool. And I think that that's a really great place to start. And that's an emotional commitment. And so for me, that's where I would start. I think it's hard to say what would work specifically, methodologically. I'm tired. But, you know, and there's various skills that I've learned over the years of doing that, lots of different exercises and stuff that I've learned how to do. I did some work in the community and regional planning program at the University of New Mexico doing community organizing, and so there are a lot of different techniques using, you know, white erase boards, for example. So there's a lot of different mediation and alternative dispute resolution techniques that I think would allow me to kind of boil things down and start getting buy-in, which I think already exists in some ways.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Joanne Pine.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm very well. How are you?
Good. This is your chance to add anything else you think we should have asked you, or you would like to tell us whether we asked you or not. Whatever it is that you think would make us make a better decision about you.
I think probably the thing that I want to say to you that for me is the most important thing is that people look at me and they see a prosecutor. And they have a very specific reaction to me in that role. And certainly given my relationship with law enforcement, they also attach a certain meaning to me in that role and in that relationship. And I have to say that I'm very probably opposite from that initial sort of reaction about me. And I have a very strong personality, and I think people also respond to that and tend to think of me as being unapproachable and mean, for lack of a better word. But the reality for me is that I'm from this town. I love this town. I think that I have an amazing relationship that I've built with and in the community, not just as a prosecutor, but working through legal aid all over the state. When I was in graduate school, a lot of the work that I did when I was an undergraduate 25 years ago. So my ties to this community and the skills that I bring are not just as a prosecutor with a certain agenda. That's not who I am. And I think the other thing about me is that I'm really incapable of, I don't have much of a poker face, and I say what I mean, and I mean what I say. And I will tell you if I'm upset, but I don't hold a grudge. And that, I think, is probably my favorite thing about myself, is I don't hold a grudge. And I think part of that is because I've really worked hard to be very clear about my intentions and about trying to learn what your intentions are, whomever you are, in whatever role I'm making contact with you. And so I think that that's something that's unique about me, and I think it's something that has allowed me to be in a lot of different worlds in a really positive way. And when I saw that this position was opening, I felt as though that personality trait that I have, if you will, was probably, to me, the thing that made me the biggest asset.
Thank you very much for your time. I
Thank
appreciate
you.
it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Any other questions? Committee members?
Happy to have one. Ma'am?
Please.
Thank you. I feel like, I just want to, I really appreciate your answers.
Thank you.
And I want to play devil's advocate for just a minute.
Please.
So I'm with you, we almost have similar backgrounds, I can tell, and so there's just too many things that I agree with. So I want to say, what happens in the day-to-day, the visceral, right? The fact that this is just a job at the end of the day, and it involves lots of really passionate people who really care as much as you do about this community, and you have identified that fact, right? Sometimes people don't want to agree, right? That's not the object in a way. And, you know, even the mediation piece of it, right? I understand. You know the question.
Oh, sure.
Go ahead. Yeah.
In the context of the job that I'm in, yeah.
Let me just say, I also think we're trying to do clarifying questions, right? And I feel like there's a piece that we've missed from you, and I just want to have that opportunity to see that.
To see how I would.
Yeah, how those difficult situations that can't be solved as a whiteboard, right? Or when you do that kind of volatility, the visceral, the concrete, it's either yes or no sometimes.
And I think that probably for me personally, the most important aspect of that is being able to check my ego at the door, which is that for someone who very much values consensus and values everyone buying into things and values everyone, getting along and sort of being happy. I mean, it's idyllic and it's certainly not possible. But at the end of the day, sometimes those things are not about me. And sometimes I still have a job to do. And again, this goes back to my own sense of being very clear about where I stand, but also respecting very clearly where someone else stands, and that it is okay to have conflict. It is okay to disagree. It is okay to not get the outcome that you want. I'm a trial lawyer. I've done hundreds of trials. I've had plenty of judges rule against me. I've had plenty of juries rule against me. And I may not like it, but it doesn't change the fact that I still have this bigger commitment to the process. And so even if the outcome isn't something that I'm okay with, or if I feel like might personally be a failure for me, if the process is still working, people still have to have the space to say, I disagree with you and I'm never gonna come around to how you see it. And you have to be able to respect that person, and you have to be able to validate that, even when you very much disagree. And that not coming to an agreement does not make a failure. That sometimes there are some things that are just left to different powers. And specifically, I'm thinking about, for example, that the executive director on the board would make recommendations to the chief, and the chief says, I don't want to do that. I mean, there's only so much you can do, and that if you do your best, and if you're thorough, and you're paying attention, and you're listening, and you're documenting, and you're doing all of those, you're diligent, and you have a method, and an institutionalized method, sometimes you just have to walk away, and sometimes you just have to make a decision. Does that help? Does that answer?
Yes, thank you.
Anything else?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very much. We
Thank you.
appreciate your waiting till like the very end. Sticking
No
with us.
problem. Thanks.
Thank you. I think that our schedule now contemplates that we would move into an executive session. I'm going to turn it back to you, Mr. Waits. to
All
do
right,
that.
thank you. Can we take a vote to go into executive session?
I move that we go into executive session.
Second.
It's gotta be an
Roll call vote.
Roll call vote.
Joanne Fine votes.
Yes.
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 All righty, thank you all. Close this out, and then see if there's any other business to go on.
I'm just making sure we get the date right for the special.
All right, ready? Oh, we have waiting for them to get back to me.
Okay, we'll wait.
Andrew scared me.
I know.
Never.
Yeah.
I'm just saying. You tell them.
Okay, it looks like we're back on the air. Do you have any handles, Mark?
Yeah.
Okay,
Go ahead, close it out.
I would entertain a motion to come back from executive session. While we were out, we talked only about personnel matters.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor, we need to do a roll call vote. Start with Ms. Fine.
Yes.
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 Yes. Yes.
Very well, we are back in our meeting.
Okay, is there any other business that we need?
Yes.
We need to set a date. Go ahead.
I need to make a motion.
Oh, please.
Isn't that the way this works, right?
Yes.
Okay, I'm doing it right. Okay, Mr. Chair, I would like to make a motion that POB secure this facility, this room, for a meeting on Tuesday, August 4th, from 5 to 7, by which time we will have checked all the references to the candidates, and we'll be able to prioritize the ranking of the candidates that will be moving forward.
Okay.
Second?
It's been motioned and second that we set a meeting. All in favor? I mean, are there any questions? All in favor, we vote yes.
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 All opposed have the same right. Motion carried. All right. That's our final business. Can I get a motion to
A motion we adjourn this
Adjourn.
meeting.
Second.
motion and second? Meeting adjourned.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
No, well, we were selling our rental house, but we found a good tenant, so now we're not selling our rental house. Yeah, we moved 600 yards away.
I think it's personal. Yes.
Beth, just so you know.
Right.
Oh,
So I'm just not gonna, I'm just now.
Okay.